Welcome to this episode of the Sales Scholars, where we talk to academic experts about anything and everything sales related. This week, our guest is Dr. Tim Butler from the University of North Alabama. Now, Tim is also the director of the Steele Center for Professional Selling and an associate professor in the marketing department. Tim received his PhD from the University of Alabama, and he's received a number of teaching awards in recognition of teaching excellence. Tim currently serves on the board of the University Sales Center Alliance and sits on the Collegiate Chapter Council for the American Marketing Association. This week, we're going to have a chance to talk with Tim about content and the impact that has on our social engagement. So, hey, Tim, I really appreciate you joining the Sales Scholars podcast. I mean, we are excited that you made the time to have a conversation with us.
Well, I'm excited to be here, Craig.
Cool. Well, look, I want to jump right in it, although I do know it's summertime, so probably the class schedule isn't as heavy as it is during the semester, right?
Well, yes, we're usually about 80% online, but this summer we're 100%, so not very many students around.
I know. I feel like we've all had to adjust to the online world. So, hey, look, I thought it would be just interesting to get us started. Tell us a little bit about the Steele Center for Professional Selling and how you got into the academic space.
Well, I did my PhD at Alabama, and they did do a very big sales program down there. So I worked for their sales program for a year, and I kind of fell in love with how much value sales education brings to students and the content. So I moved to the University of North Alabama in the fall of 16 and became the director of the sales program in the fall of 2017. Our program's been around since about 2013, and I generally teach. We've added 2 additional sales faculty, and I generally teach the intro sales and the advanced sales courses. And my focus is on anything to do with the sales process in terms of persuasive communication, but also technology surrounding the sales process and our conversations about content today. And I really focus in a lot on LinkedIn, both for promoting the center, but also with my students.
No, that's great. And actually, it's funny that you mentioned the whole LinkedIn thing, because I know that's one of the ways that you and I initially connected. And then I specifically reached out to you on this particular topic because I see a lot of the content that you have put out there. And, you know, there's that phrase, content is king. In fact, I think when it was first mentioned, it was a long time ago before it had anything to do with what's being published online. But man, it seems to be a hot topic today. So I want to tackle this content thing that's related to what happens from a social selling standpoint, but overall just in selling in general. And so tell me a little bit why you think that content is such a critical thing for today's salespeople to understand.
Well, I think content's relevant for salespeople in all disciplines right now. You think about Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime. Everything right now seems to be about either creating content or providing platforms to share content. I think it's really important for sales and marketing because in order to produce organic content, non-paid content, it's all about engagement. And that's likes, shares, tags, comments, engagement, engaging content. So it's really important to understand how to create content, because you have to do that and you have to put it out on a regular basis, and it has to be engaging in order for you to get more people to see your brand.
Yeah. I liked how you mentioned too all the kind of likes, comments. I always think about that as like it's the language of social in terms of how you speak social nowadays when it comes to engaging people online. Have you found anything in particular, like as you've worked with your students, that either they've given you feedback or you've seen where it's really helped with engagement?
Engagement, again, is just so important because you have to be top of mind when people are making a consumer decision, whether you're on the B2B or B2C side. Salespeople need to be seen as a credible expert. And the way you can do that is by sharing relevant content in your industry. So as far as how to develop content, I would say that three major things that are important that I teach my students about, and anybody else who I work with, is authenticity is probably the most important element. And then a focus on your audience, and then do your best to be telling stories with your content.
Okay.
So what I mean by all those things is people crave authenticity. I mean, everything in our world right now, almost everything is artificially constructed, technology driven. You go to the grocery store, every orange is the same magically. If people are craving authenticity and you aren't being authentic, and that doesn't mean being perfect. So I think when I do sales training, I tell people it's not about being perfect and saying everything right and doing everything right. It's about being authentic and imperfect. And in doing that, you catch people's attention, because there's just not enough authenticity out there. So it's about being your authentic self and putting that out there and being vulnerable, and people respond really well to that.
It's so funny as you talk about authenticity, because just over the last maybe month and a half, I'm fairly active in the social space on content. And one post I posted, I came across an article that was talking about how hard it is to work from home, and like how you now balance hey, I'm off work versus when I'm on work. And so I threw the article out there with the comment that, hey, is anyone else struggling with this like I am? Because this is a bigger challenge. And for one reason or another, man, that post, I mean, just from a data standpoint, I had more than 12,000 people look at it. I haven't had a post come close to something like that. And then an enormous amount of engagement. And I go back to the only thing that was different in that post versus some of the others was that I literally was authentically saying, hey, is anyone wrestling with this thing? And man, that seemed to work. So what about you? Have you had any experiences where you've seen that kind of make a difference in what you've put out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was very authentic, but it was also asking a question and encouraging engagement. It was current and relevant, which made people want to engage in it as well. I personally, when I do posts, and I don't do a ton of posts about me in particular, it's more about the sales center and our students. And when folks can see your passion about what you do, and in my case, I work a lot with students, they find that to be more authentic and more interesting, and therefore more engaging than other subjects that don't just display that passion and interest.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, authenticity. I've heard that, hot topic in branding, but also obviously hot topic in as we're sitting here talking about content and the content you put out there.
Yeah, absolutely, Craig.
Yeah. So you had a couple other principles that I really
So the next one I think would be focus on your audience. And a lot of people don't think that through enough. If you went back to, I guess, around 2013, we had about 39% more people consuming content on desktops and laptops than mobile. That statistic has basically switched in the last 6 or 7 years to now 37% more people are on mobile. And I think that gap is going to continue to widen. So if people are looking at content on their phones and you have a large paragraph with no picture, video, and just a lot of hard to consume content, you're not really thinking about your audience. You need to be thinking about what would be easy for them to engage with. And so the typical idea of several long paragraphs of information does not apply in that context. So going along with that, you can also think about, if they do want more information, we have the ability to put a link in that content, but it should be a short sentence or two leading into a link to an article, a picture, a short video, not a long video, because people just don't watch long videos on their phones. So you have to be thinking about the majority, if the majority of your audience, which most audiences are this way, are on their phones, how can I really focus my information to that channel or medium? And then thinking about what would engage your audience overall in terms of topics that might be interesting.
And you probably see this with your students. I know I see it some with my students, which is what I'll call it, the reduction in attention span. But truthfully, I don't think that's just students. I think as we have, as the world has sped up, and that statistic you mentioned about the flip on consumption by mobile, I mean, that's a pretty shocking change from what used to be, which, because mobile, obviously our devices are pretty easily accessible, that, it's no wonder attention spans are shorter. And then it sounds like what you're saying is, hey, look, you got to you got to make sure that you understand your audience, and then, match what you're putting out there so it will, you'll engage them.
Yeah, we've done some marketing for a program we have here on Facebook, and I've seen statistics from various campaigns and posts that had as much as 95 or 100% mobile in terms of viewing. So that's important. And then definitely the younger generations that grew up consuming content in this way are way more used to that. But yeah, even all of us who are on a phone and consuming content, it's just the medium itself is hard to process a lot of information. Plus, the ability to scroll past it or go to a different app or whatever, you really have to draw attention quickly and not make it look like it's going to be a lot of effort for them to engage with you or your content. And that's what attracts people to a particular post or makes them stop scrolling, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I think one of the things that we talk about a good bit in one of our particular classes in digital selling is about the buyer personas, which is just, formal way of saying, hey, who's buying your product? And making sure that as you're talking about the audience, making sure you understand who that is, so how to talk to them, what their interests will be, and what will drive that engagement. I feel like we're probably going to use the word engagement like 100 times in this conversation, but I mean that's the goal,
right? And so when you're thinking about your audience, you want to provide the content the way they want it, but you also want to think about what, when we talk about in sales, empathy, right? Do we understand what our audience would care about right now? I had seen someone in leasing office supply or office space, and that's a big struggle probably right now because of COVID, and figuring out how to create engaging content. And he put up some articles about how people are missing the office experience, the in-office experience. So in doing that, he's providing a lot of relevant content to what people are going through right now, and being empathetic and understanding what your audience would possibly be persuaded by or interested in is why that was successful.
Yeah, that's understanding your audience, relevance, key part of content. So I love that. So imagine if I'm new to this content game, what would be some of the tips that you might give me to kind of get started? Because I know obviously you're working with a lot of folks who are stepping out into the professional world with students. So have you seen anything that you feel like, hey, these are really good practices to kind of get going?
Well, I think the most important thing is patience. It takes a long time to build a brand, and it takes a lot of little things before you become a source of information. So this is years, not days or months. If you were to think about it in the context of building a LinkedIn profile, and how would you start creating content on that? And my students, some of them, or a lot of them, depending on when I, start interacting with them, don't even have a profile. So I say, let's build a profile, build out the, and before you do that, before you build your profile, think about who you are, what you stand for, all these different things that make you your personal brand, which is often very challenging for my students and for anyone, because you rarely are looking inward to say, who am I and what do I represent? And when you get some ideas around that, you can create your profile and then figure out. So if you start posting a lot of content, then you have no audience. So you need to start posting content, but it's more important to build your audience and make it relevant. So in a LinkedIn context, you'd want to connect with people in the industry you want to be in or the industry you are in. And you'd want to do things like connect with peers or look at other people's profiles and see who they're connected with and build a relevant audience, because nobody's going to engage with your content if you haven't built a really good audience that is relevant. So it's not about size of the audience, it's about the quality of that. And then as you're building that out, you're starting to launch content. And so that's what I would say would be what would lead up to creating content. And then when you're creating content, refer to some of the things we talked about: authenticity, telling a story, really focusing on your audience.
I know we didn't talk about this necessarily in advance, but it just makes me curious as we're sitting here talking, is what are some of the maybe mistakes that you've seen people make out of the gate early on as they step into this kind of content arena?
Well, I've seen a lot of mistakes, and it's basically shows that they have just a lack of understanding of what the space would require for content, and that's fine. That's nothing that we judge, but what they need to know is, some mistakes you'd make is putting out just a large paragraph with no image, no video, no question. A lot of people put their content, their words, and then they tag a bunch of people and hashtag at the end of that post. The more you can integrate tagging people into the story that you're telling, the more likely those people who are being tagged are not going to be annoyed, but they're going to be engaged by their involvement in the conversation. So whenever I'm trying to post something on LinkedIn, I'm always trying to tag people because it tags into their network. So you want that algorithm to work with you, but you also want to stay authentic. So the way to do that is that way. Other mistakes, I guess, would be putting out long videos or trying to, I guess, if you focus a lot on yourself, it's not going to bring a lot of value. So the way people gain a lot is by giving in these communities, right? Giving content, giving value, giving likes. So I'll go through, I know people who produce a ton of content, but never go on and actually consume other people's content and like and engage with that. Well, when you do that, it creates reciprocity. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to come back and like your post, but some will. And so you want to engage and give in that environment as well. And a lot of people are just providing content and they're not turning the corner on creating engaging content.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, those are good. I've seen some of those mistakes myself when people put content out there. Maybe the one I'll add, and I'm curious as to if you've seen this one, is it's back to your principles, but they don't take time to determine who their audience should be. And so they end up with this, maybe they've built a network, but it's of a variety of people all over the board. And so then it makes it awful tough to decide the type of content that you're going to put out there.
I totally agree, Craig. Like if you build a wide audience that is really disconnected, you have trouble presenting information that's going to be interesting to all of them. So it's better to find your niche or your niche and then develop really relevant content for them. One thing I noticed is that happened to me a little bit because I started using LinkedIn a lot when I was a PhD student. And so I developed an audience. I became friends with a lot of people who were students in the sales program there. And that ended up working out really well because they became salespeople and they became the people I wanted. But until I fully developed who I was, my brand evolved a little bit. Then so I have a little bit of segmentation issues with the audience that I have. So those things can happen even naturally, not to mention if you aren't thinking about what you're doing when you're building the audience.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience. I'd never really actually engaged on some of the social platforms as much until I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but until I was getting ready to teach a class on the topic, and I took a crash course in it. And I realized for me and my network, I had a network that was kind of all over the place. And when I narrowed it back down to certainly the industry that I was in, and then for me stepping into the academic world, that became a priority of people that I wanted to connect with and build my network with, I started engaging those people and then trying to put content out there that was of interest, certainly of interest to others, quite frankly, engaging in content that I felt like was really interesting to me.
Yeah, and I must be too nice a person because I haven't figured out, I don't want to delete people, but the technical side of it is all these social media platforms provide you a certain amount of free organic reach. So maybe 10%, or maybe 15 or 20 if you're more interesting of your followers will see organically that post. So if you're getting, let's say, 100 or 200 free people seeing your post, and a large percentage of those people are really not relevant to the message, then the idea that that post is going to get engagement is lessened.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. I forgot all about how some of that stuff works. Can somebody work around that, or is that just a product of how the systems are, and you have to work with it in terms of being strategic on how you build your network?
There's no way for us as users to get involved in that. I do know that the algorithms are trying to put it into the right feeds of people who have previously engaged with your post. So there's a good chance that it's going to send it to the right parts of your audience, but you make it more challenging when you have a wider audience that is not fitting what you're trying to communicate and who you're trying to communicate with. And I think that's really relevant for salespeople who are trying to use this platform or any platforms and content creation to build their brand and ultimately lead to some revenue relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that phrase, leading to revenue relationships, because I read something the other day. It says, look, all of this networking, creating content is designed to create opportunities for people.
And that's a long-term process. I could say that I've gotten revenue from LinkedIn, and I haven't really tracked it. But I know that over time, I've now had people reach out, and that has led to relationships between the center and a company. It's just a great platform for that. But LinkedIn becomes almost something you don't necessarily mention that we met that way. Sometimes you do, but it's so ubiquitous in industry that, of course, you probably met via LinkedIn. How else would you have met? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. That language is changing. So, hey, listen, I know you get a chance to work with the kind of the future salespeople, future sales leaders of of our world. Never knowing where the students are going to end up. But what are maybe some of the things you've learned from them about this content topic that you think would be helpful for companies to understand?
Well, I've learned a lot. Um, First, I really enjoy working with them, and I always elevate them to the future professionals they're going to be. That's a great way to communicate with them. But there's so many lessons, and I think that the companies that are doing the best, and companies are not just worried about millennial and Gen Zs in terms of hiring, but they're also becoming consumers. You know, the older millennials are 30 to 35, and so they're in the prime of life in terms of being a consumer as well. So all the lessons that I've learned, such as authenticity, and I think we talked a lot about quickness and short videos, and all of that is amplified in this younger generation. So I've learned a lot about the same principles that we've talked about are even more important. And authenticity is very important. Their ability to see that the company cares about them, invests in them, and on the employee side, or doesn't is socially responsible on the consumer side. And then, so the other thing too is they don't respond well. So a lesson I learned, and I'll try to tell it as quickly as possible, but I went to a social media conference and I learned that in my generation, I guess Gen Y, X, whatever, I liked emails a lot. And I was always emailing my students. I was like, why are they not responding to emails? And they prefer things like GroupMe, text, Instagram, and I'm sitting here in the mindset of email and Facebook, and it's not going to work. So I thought, to be a better communicator with these students, I'm not going to make them adapt to me. I'm going to adapt to them. And these companies need to be thinking about that, both from marketing to the consumer side, but also marketing internal in terms of the employee recruiting side. Is instead of, if you have these old training documents that are super long and don't have a lot of pointless stuff in them, they're going to ignore them. They're going to not like that experience. So thinking about streamlining all those processes and also being open to feedback from them to make it better, because ultimately your communication and your effectiveness as a company will be lower if you don't do that.
That's great. Great way to wrap it up. So, Tim, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you being on the show. I always talk about this show as being, hey, we talk about anything and everything sales related with our scholars, and we got a chance to cover some great ground. So thanks for sharing what you know about sales with our audience.
Oh, you're very welcome, Craig. I enjoyed it.